Okay, so welcome everyone for this afternoon conference. We are very honored to have a guest with us who will teach us a lot about orthodoxy. Before starting and introducing him, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Tobias Brandner. I am a professor at the Chinese University of Hong Kong at the Divinity School of Zhongqi College. I am originally from Switzerland, but I have been living here for about more than 25 years. 我们当中有很多的内地的同学，欢迎你们。我是基本上说英语的，本来是说德语的哈，不过现在我们有这个英语的 talk，希望大家都可以明白。如果你们有什么问题，你们也可以用普通话问我们。不过我们基本上今天的下午的talk 就是用英语的哈。Okay, so let me go on introducing myself. I've been here in Hong Kong 25 years and I am teaching history of Christianity and world Christianity studies, related studies here. And I have had the chance to work together with the Institute for Sino-Christian Studies for many years in various forms. I have led many groups of church people, of theologians, to the ISCS. More recently, I have had the chance to publish a book in Chinese with Mingfeng Press from ISCS. The English name is Tradition, Transmission, Transformations, a Critical History of Christianity from the Time of Jesus to the Eve of the Reformation. 普通话就是合久必分。从耶稣时代到改革前夜的西方基督教批判史，希望我说的对。And yes, and then I have had 2 years ago the chance to work together with ISCS on an invitation of a global conference of the global network of study centers on Christianity and theology. So we have had a very close cooperation. And so I'm very grateful for the invitation to lead through this afternoon. Now, this afternoon is about, our speaker today is Cyril Hovorun, Father Cyril Hovorun. He is originally from Ukraine. That's where he first began his studies, not in theology, but in theoretical physics, before moving on to the study of theology at the Theological Seminary and the Academy in Kiev. He is an archimandrite, that is a priest of the Orthodox Church. An archimandrite is a monastic priest, and so he has been on various levels involved in the Orthodox Church, also in leadership position, and he got his Master of Arts and his PhD in theology from the University of Durham in the United Kingdom. That's also, and he taught theology in a number of confessional and public institutions around the world. He has been a visiting professor in various universities and seminaries all around the world, and also many of them in China, where he has given lectures. So some of you might have met him before or heard of him. His strong relationship to the ISCS goes back to the time of around 13 years ago, 12 years ago, when he was the chairman of the Department of Theology at the Doctoral School of the Russian Orthodox Church in Moscow. It was during that time that the Institute of Sino-Christian Studies had regular contact with Father Hovorun. Today, Professor Hovorun is teaching at the University College in Stockholm, but he is still traveling around the world, giving talks. Right now, he is in Uzbekistan, I just learned, giving lectures there and visiting the church. Throughout the past years, he has regularly been publishing. Among his many publications are the recent publication, Political Orthodoxies, the Unorthodoxies of the Church Coerced, which appeared 3 years ago in Minneapolis in Fortress Press, and 2 years ago in Ukrainian translation. And also a few years ago, the book From Antioch to Sion, an Evolution of Nestorianism, which had been published in 2014 in the Chinese Orthodox press in Chinese. Now, we may at some point show you the link to his CV if you want to learn more about the speaker. But today's rundown, just that you know what you can expect, we will have first around the 1 hour lecture by Professor Hovorun, and after that I will give a short response, highlight some topics, some issues, and possibly also raise a question. And then there will be time for you to have around 20 to 30 minutes of question and answer. So if you have a question, please write your question into the question and answer box. There will not be a possibility for you to raise the question personally. So please put your question either in English or in Chinese in the question box, and we will then bring the question to the attention of our speaker. So without further ado, I would like to introduce or to welcome now Cyril Hovorun to start his lecture. Welcome, Cyril.
Greetings to everyone. Greetings to the Institute of Sino-Christian Studies. Greetings to the Chinese audiences. It's a privilege to lecture. I used to come to China quite often, every second year. So I also supposed to come to China this year in the fall, but because of the pandemic, it was impossible. So we decided to have this online, and I hope next time it will be in person. We all miss personal lecturing and personal contacts, of course, but still I didn't miss an opportunity to be as close to China as possible. That's why I came to Central Asia, to Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan, which was the kind of the borderline of ancient China. I just visited a place which used to be the most western outpost of China under the Tang Dynasty in Kyrgyzstan. So I'm quite close to China in my heart and physically, so to say. And indeed, my talk will be on the topic which can be also bridging different cultures. And indeed, it used to bridge to connect different cultures in the past. And I hope it will be reutilized for, bridging different traditions. Theological within Christianity, between different religious traditions, indeed. Well, the topic of theosis, which is a Greek word, which can be translated as divinization, this concept seems to be kind of forgotten or confined to some pockets of traditions, so to say. But I think the ongoing study of theosis demonstrates that it used to be widely spread. I just want to mention, for instance, the work which is in the process of preparation by the Oxford University Press. It will be titled the Oxford Handbook of Theosis or Divinization, which will be published by international scholars who contribute to this volume. And this volume demonstrates that the idea of theosis, the idea of divinization, is pertinent actually to many theological traditions that are not directly associated with theosis. Like, for instance, the traditions of Lutheranism, of Reformation, quite surprisingly. So there will be contributions about the Lutheran perception of theosis, or in the Catholic Church, which is also not renowned for addressing the idea of theosis. Theosis is regarded to be an Eastern tradition, but as a matter of fact, it was universal, used to be universal, and its universality is being discovered through the modern scholarship. There are also some, I think, interesting connections between the idea of theosis in Christianity and in other religions. Certainly, it was a very prominent, this idea of theosis, divinization, had a prominent place in the Greco-Roman religion, from which Christianity somehow borrowed a lot of things. And well, as you know, Christianity was born in the context of the Roman Empire, the Greco-Roman world, but also far in the East. the idea of theosis was popular. The idea of light, of the divine light. I just today in the morning in Khiva, where I am in Uzbekistan, I visited the foundation of an ancient Zoroastrian temple, because this area, the kingdom of Khwarezm, before Islam, was dominated by many religions, including Buddhism, but also Zoroastrianism. It was a kind of dominant tradition here, and they had a lot of temples, and they actually entertained in different forms the idea of theosis, of divinization for the followers of this religion. I'm pretty sure that this idea of theosis can be also found identified in many other Eastern, including the traditional Chinese religion. So it's a lot of it's a lot to explore. So I hope that my lecture will incite you somehow to extrapolate this idea of theosis to your own religious context, if you want, and to identify some ideas which are close to the idea of theosis in my own tradition, which is Eastern Christianity. So yes, well, a technical thing. I think you've been distributed the handouts, right? That I will that from which I will quote some, long quotes, long text, so you could follow those quotes, and I will explain the ideas embedded in those quotes. So the Christian doctrine of theosis, in many points, even if officially resembled the traditional philosophy and religion, meaning the Greco-Roman religion and the Greco-Roman philosophy, which at that time was not, they were not separated. They constituted one thing. Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah.
Could you try to turn yourself the volume up a little bit? You are.
Yeah, sure. I can speak a bit louder, maybe.
That would be good. Yes. Sorry for the interruption.
Can you hear me now?
I think it's a bit better. Yes.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you for.
Perfect. Thank you.
Is it better? Okay, good. I'll be good. Excellent. So essentially, the Greco-Roman philosophy or religion were not two separate things as they are in our times. In our times, philosophy is considered to be a secular kind of secular tradition, secular activity, in contrast to religion, which is a metaphysical activity. In the ancient times, they constituted one single package, one single thing, and there were just two different aspects of the same thing: philosophy and religion. So in both ancient philosophy and religion, theosis constituted an important element in both of them. And it started as early as the earliest samples of the Greek mythology. Greek mythology brought up many examples of apotheosis. Apotheosis was the Greek word for divinization. And apotheosis meant literally the crossing by humans, the divide between mortals and immortals. The ancients, they differentiated between the human beings and gods by the criterion of being mortal or immortal, the capacity of dying. So gods could not die, only human beings could die. And apotheosis meant crossing the borderline between the realm where the beings, to the realm where beings didn't die. Immortality was synonymous to divinity. Heroes, for example, such as Heracles, for instance, and others, were celebrated as mortals who achieved divine status of immortals. So there were examples like, as I said, Heracles, or Helena, the famous Helena, who had become the reason of the Trojan War. She was mortal, and then she was immortalized eventually and became a kind of a divinity. That's why some ancient authors like Homer believed that at least some parts of any human beings are innately divine. So in condition to the kind of the whole divinization of a human being into the state of immortality, all human beings also had some parts of divinity, some parts of immortality within themselves. Pindar, for instance, claimed that, and I quote him, "We do have some likeness to immortals in mighty mind of nature," end of quote. According to Plato, if a philosopher cultivates the godlike part of his nature, he can achieve deification. In such case, his soul, I quote Plato, brings calm to the sea of desires, but by following reasons and by contemplating the true and divine. So it's interesting that for Plato, the idea of theosis, of divinization, meant the internal calmness of the human soul, of the human inner being. Socrates was an example of such philosopher, at least from the perspective of Plato, and from the perspective of another biographer of Socrates, Xenophon. For both Plato and Xenophon, Socrates' deification was marked, for instance, by him possessing his own daemonion. Probably you know this famous concept of daemonion, a kind of doubler for exceptional human beings, a spirit that goes along with a human being. So Socrates had such such a daemonion, which was sample ancient. Socrates was close to the immortals. Stoics in the later centuries agreed that Socrates was indeed a model of deification. There was a consensus that all philosophers should follow Socrates' model. After all, deification is the ultimate destination of every true philosopher. Neoplatonists describe this destination in detail. Neoplatonists who, at the stage after the Stoics, continued the thought of Plato and combined it with the thought of Aristotle. Plotinus, one of the Neoplatonists, yeah, you can see the quote from him, gave an account of his personal experience of what he called identifying with the divine. So Plotinus actually explained how he felt personally. What does it mean to be deified, to be like God? And this is the quote: "Often I have woken up out of the body to myself and have entered into myself, going out from all other things. I have a wonderful assurance that most of all, I belong to the better part. I have actually lived the best life and come to identify with the divine and set firm in it. I have come to that supreme actuality, setting myself above all else in the realm of the intellect. And after that, rest in the divine, when I have come down from intellect to discursive reasoning. I am puzzled how I ever came down and how my soul has come to be in the body when it is what it has shown itself to be by itself, even when it is in the body." This is an interesting experience which resonates somehow with the posterior Christian experiences of a person getting out of himself. The Greeks used for this the word ecstasis. Probably you know this word. It is also used in English. Ecstasis meaning literally standing out of the bodily experiences, the experience of soul, observing, contemplating the world outside the body. Well, in the modern culture, this word, well, is used for drugs, which is a very dubious experience, of course, but the divine experience was completely different, well, from the perspective of ancient philosophers and theologians. So we can see some points of divergence between the ancient Greek and Christian experiences of divinization, of stepping out of themselves. However, the more there were points of convergence between the Christian and pagan takes on divinization, the more the Christian authors stressed the difference between them. So they did not want to identify their own experience of divinization with the ancient Greek experience of divinization. Then they believed that the ancient Greek experience of divinization was kind of demonic, was not correct, was not okay. And that's why they stress that our Christian experience of divinization is different. For this reason, they avoided to use the term apotheosis, the ancient Greek term apotheosis for divinization, and instead they coined a new term, theosis. So even though these two words are very similar, apotheosis and theosis, they were used for different purposes. Theosis is a Christian word for divinization. Apotheosis is a pagan word for divinization. For the Christian theologians, Christian theosis is possible only because of the incarnation. As in the incarnation, God appropriated humankind, so all human beings can appropriate divine qualities through their participation in the incarnation. They can become like God without, however, turning to God. So that was the difference between the Christian idea of divinization and the pagan. For the pagans, human beings could become actual gods, could like live in Olympus, could be like gods and essentially turn to gods. For Christians, human beings can always be only like God, but never can turn to a divinity themselves. Theosis for Christians is a perichoresis with the divine properties, which mirrors the perichoresis of divinity and humanity in the person of Jesus Christ. Perichoresis is kind of mutual penetration. That is the Greek word which means mutual penetration. So the Christians believe that that being in divinization can adopt some qualities, some properties of God, but those properties do not make them God, do not make them divine beings. They remain human beings. Their nature remains the same, but some properties that they adopt, they are divine, and that makes a person, a human being, divinized. And this is possible only because of Jesus Christ, exactly. Theosis can be interpreted from the perspective of the logical categories of commonality and particularity. Logics was extremely important for the ancient Greeks and for the Christian theologians. And particularly, the distinction between two categories was important for Neoplatonists and then for the Christian theologians. And that was the distinction between the commonality and particularity. To explain it in a very simple way, commonality is the common denominator that we can identify in two different things. Like I can take two tables next to each other. They will be two particular tables, but they share some commonality, the common nature of tables or tableness, so to say, tableness. And that is the commonality. So these two basic distinctions, two categories, commonality and particularity, were employed by theologians to explain divinization, to explain theosis. For example, and they saw the references to two kinds of divinization, the common divinization, particular divinization in the scriptures. Like the common theosis has been the one described in Psalms. You are gods, from Psalm 82, verse 6. This phrase Jesus in John 10:34. Second Epistle of Peter, chapter 1, could also be as a reference to the common divinization envisaged for the entire human. This divinization can be energetic energy means collaboration between a human being and God. It means that the divination happens as a divine act, but it requires human participation, human agency. That is what is called a synergy. As a result of synergy between God and human beings, only some achieve particular divinization. In the Eastern Christianity, they are regarded saints. So, well, at least in the Eastern Christianity, divinization is not envisaged, it does not happen for everyone. It is envisaged, it is supposed that every Christian who participates in the life of the church can become divinized like God. But it does mean that everyone does become like God. Only saints do this, and saints constitute a sort of normativity for the Christian life. So divinization constitutes the norm, but not everyone achieves this norm. Theosis can be also perceived from the perspective of differentiation between what is given and what is assigned to the human nature. That is another important category, which was which goes back to Aristotle at least, and was particularly appropriated by Christian theologians. So they differentiated between something which is given to human nature and something that is supposed to be achieved by every individual human being. So theosis is the ultimate assignment for every human being. At the same time, every human being has a godlike part in his or her nature, which is in the patristic literature has been denoted as isotheon, or equal to God, being equal to God. So isotheon is another important concept in the Eastern Christian theology of divinization. It comes together with theosis. Like theosis is a potentiality for the human beings, and isotheon is the actuality for human beings. Isotheon is isotheon as a feature of the common human nature, and its potentiality actualizes the particular theosis of an individual human beings. The word isotheon was widely used in the classical antiquity. It was essential in the Greek mythology and referred to demigods and heroes. Dramatic and hermeneutical texts also often used it to praise their protagonists, such as Odysseus. So Homer often referred to Odysseus as the one who is isotheon, equal to God. In the period of late antiquity, when Christianity was born, Neoplatonic philosophers made occasional references to isotheon. Iamblichus, for instance, stated that God-equal deeds, isothea erga, cannot be done without help of the gods. It's interesting that Iamblichus also stressed the idea of synergy, of collaboration between human beings and gods in achieving the status of divinization. In the patristic literature, Cyril of Alexandria, who was a kind of prominent, a key theologian who explained the incarnation, he connected isotheon with the image of God. So isotheon, they took this ancient Greek Homeric concept of isotheon and applied it to the creation of human beings by God, and connected it with the ideas of the image of God. So that they differentiated between the idea of the image of God and the idea of likeness of God. Isotheon, they connected with the image of God and like potentiality, and theosis, they connected with the likeness of God as the actuality of divinization. For Gregory of Nyssa, who the idea of isotheon, the concept of isotheon, was fundamental human capacity of making choice. He called this capacity authexousion. This is very important concept that somehow goes together with the concept of freedom, eleftheria. I will explain a bit later the difference between authexousion and eleftheria, two concepts that indicate the potentiality and actuality of freedom, of human freedom, how they're connected with the potentiality and actuality of theosis, of divinization. Hesychius, a lexicographer, a famous ancient Christian lexicographer, summarized this patristic tradition in his lexicon, where he defined the sotheon as immortal soul. So that part of the divine, the human nature, which was indicated as early as by Plato, Christian theologians and philosophers identified with the immortal soul and called it isotheon. The equal to God's soul becomes godlike in the process of deification, theosis. So the immortal soul has this potentiality of deification. This potentiality is called isotheon, and the process of and a person the original patristic framework for theosis was incarnational and cosmic. Irenaeus, an early Christian father, very important one in the pre-Nicene tradition, he spoke about the theosis of the entire world, not just about human being being to be deified, but also about the entire world being able to deify it. I think this concept is particularly important in the modern ecological thinking, eco-theological thinking. The entire discussion about the environment nowadays, about ecology, seen from a very interesting perspective of Irenaeus and his outlook at the being called to deification through Jesus Christ. So for Irenaeus, theosis of the world became possible as a result of the incarnation of the Word in the person of Jesus Christ. Through incarnation, God embraced the entire universe with a purpose to bring it to unity with himself. For Irenaeus, God became what we are to make us what he is. This is a very famous dictum of Irenaeus that is a kind of formula of deification. In other words, there is a reciprocity and causality between the incarnation and divinization. The former, that is the incarnation, causes the latter, that is divinization, and the latter mirrors the former. In other words, the divinization, theosis of a human being, mirrors the incarnation of God in the person of Jesus Christ. Irenaeus called God's embracement of the entire created world recapitulatio or anakephaleosis, well, the Latin, the Greek words. This was a reference to Paul, who spoke about God's plan to unite all things in him, Jesus Christ, things in heaven and things on earth. This is from Ephesians 1. Irenaeus' concept of recapitulatio implied that God had incarnated for the sake of salvation of human beings and of the entire universe. I quote him, the entire flesh of the entire humankind, the whole world entered under the head of Christ. By the 4th century, the idea of divinization became widely accepted in the Christian theology. Athanasius of Alexandria employed it in his polemics against Arius. Well, I assume that you've heard about the Arian controversy, how they argued in the 4th century in Alexandria then in the entire Greco-Roman world about whether Jesus Christ is a true God, true Son of God, whether there is a subordination of the Son to the Father, whether there is a distance between the Son and the Father. So all this discussion had to do with the concept of deification. The concept of deification is somehow a clue to understand this controversy, the arguments of both sides. So Athanasius of Alexandria employed the concept of theosis in his polemics against Arius. He used the point of Irenaeus with the reversal logical causality, given that we get divinized. So that was kind of given. was not discussed. It was taken for granted that we are divinized, we are eligible for theosis. The law was because of the true God, because this hypothesis that we are called to be divine, godlike, towards theosis stands only if the God has become a human being. Otherwise, our divinization would have been impossible. In fact, then our Christian learned the possibility of theosis. And here I quote Athanasius more extensively. So here, the Son became man that we might become divine. And he revealed himself through a body that we might receive an idea of the invisible Father. And he endured insults from man that we might inherit incorruption. He himself was harmed in no respect, as he is impassible and incorruptible and the very word and God. But he cared for and saved suffering man, for whom he endured these things by his impassibility. And in short, the achievements of the Savior effected through his incarnation are of such a kind and so great that if anyone wished to expound them, he would be like those who gaze at the vast expanse of the sea and wish to count the number of its waves. Gregory of Nazianzus, who lived in the 4th century, who was a great theologian. For this reason, he has this kind of pen name or nickname, Gregory the theologian. He abbreviated this idea of Athanasius to one verse. And since then God is made man, so man is perfect as God. And that is my glory. The idea of divinization was important for Gregory, who frequently used the word theosis. He acknowledged that this word is not biblical. That's why, while it was kind of a debatable term, some more creative theologians did not accept it, but Gregory insisted it is appropriate to express this biblical teaching. Well, from this perspective, the term theosis was as new as other key words discussed widely in that period of time, such as homoousios or hypostasis. While still some conservative theologians did not accept those terms, and Greg confederates, Dortian fathers insisted that those terms are acceptable even though they are not biblical. He spoke of theosis, for example, in the oration, which is not surprisingly dedicated to Athanasius of Alexandria, because Gregory essentially explained the idea of Athanasius. I quote Gregory: "Whoever has been permitted to escape from matter and from the fleshy cloud, or should we call it a veil, by means of reason and contemplation, so as to hold communion with God and be associated with the purest light, insofar as human nature can attain to it, such a man is truly blessed, both in terms of his ascent from here and in terms of his deification there, a deification which is inferred by true philosophy, and by virtue of describing all the duality of matter through that unity which is perceived in the Trinity." End of quote. The Syrian poet and theologian also lived in the 4th century and also participated in the Arian controversy, but he lived in the Syriac milieu on the edge of the eastern edge of the Greek world, sometimes in Persia, sometimes in Byzantium. He expressed the same idea in more verses. I quote him. It is a beautiful Syriac poem that he dedicates to this concept of theosis. "It is he who was begotten of divinity according to his nature, and of humanity, which was not according to his nature, and of baptism, which was not his habit, so that we might be begotten of humanity according to our nature, and of divinity, which is not according to our nature, and of the Spirit, which is not our habit." So this is a direct reference to deification of our humanity, which is not natural for us, but which we can achieve owing to the incarnation of God. The writings of Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite, a writer who lived also in Syria in the early 6th century, constituted a landmark in the Christian theology of Theosis. This pseudonymous author, he concealed his identity behind this biblical kind of figure of Dionysius the Areopagite, but we don't know his real name. And he made the theology of Theosis his central topic and a departure point for the exploration of other theological topics. So it was a kind of a key to the Pseudo-Dionysian theology. Being a Neoplatonist, Pseudo-Dionysius, in the Platonic way, spoke about godlike minds that ascend to the archetype. He spoke about architheos as the archetype for Theosis, and they become similar to this architheos, the original God. As a Christian, however, Pseudo-Dionysius specified that this archetype has names, the Father and the Son. Pseudo-Dionysius went further than any other Christian theologian before him in asserting that a human being can become not only godlike, but also father-like and son-like. At the same time, he stressed that there is always an unsurmountable chasm between God and creatures. However godlike the latter can become. And I quote him, "The procession of our intellectual activity can at least go this far, that all fatherhood and all sonship gifts and on the celestial powers. This is why godlike, deiform, theoides, he used the words, come to be and be named gods or father of gods. Fatherhood and sonship of this kind are bestowed by that supreme source of fatherhood and sonship on us, brought to perfection in a spiritual fashion. That is incorporeally, immaterially, and in the domain of mind. And this is the work of the divine spirit, which is located beyond all conceptual immateriality and all divinization. And it is the work too of the Father and of the Son, who supremely transcend all divine fatherhood and sonship. In reality, there is no exact likeness between caused and cause, for the caused carry within themselves only such images of their originating sources as are possible for them, whereas the causes themselves are located in a realm transcending the caused, according to the argument regarding their source." End of quote. Well, now we come to Maximus the Confessor, probably the most important theologian who dedicated a good deal of theology to the concept of theosis. He identified the moving force of deification, which is love. Love was central for the thought of Maximus, and it also was central for his concept of theosis, of deification. Love is also reciprocal. The love of God to humankind moves God to become a human being and then inspires human beings to love God. Out of love to God, human beings move to him and become deified. So love moves human beings towards deification. And I quote Maximus, "He himself by grace is and is called God, just as God by his condensation is and is called man for the sake of man. And also that so that the power of this reciprocal disposition might be shown forth herein, a power that divinizes man through his love for God and humanizes God through his love for man. And by this beautiful exchange, it renders God man by reason of the divinization of man, and man God by reason of the incarnation of God. For the Logos of God, who is God, wills always and in all things to accomplish the mystery of his embodiment." So essentially, Maximus says the same as his predecessors, that God becomes a human being in order to make a human being divine. And he adds, however, to this concept that it is love that drives God towards incarnation, and it is love that brings human beings to similarity with God. Maximus thus added an important nuance, yes, to the basic thesis that God became a human being to make a human being divine. And he presented the loving reciprocity between God and human beings as two distinct ages, the age of the incarnation and the age of divinization of human beings. And I quote him, he would become man in a manner known to him, and at the same time make man God through union with himself. And thus, he wisely divided the ages, determining that some would be for the activity of his becoming man, and others for the activity of making man God. Maximus described the age of Theosis as mirroring the process of incarnation. And I quote again, we must henceforth await those other ages that are to come for the actualization of the mystical and ineffable divinization of human beings, in which God will show the overflowing riches of his goodness to us, completely and actively affecting divinization in those who are worthy. For if he himself reached the limit of his mystical activity of becoming man, becoming like us in every way but without sin, and having descended into the lowermost parts of the earth, to where the tyranny of sin had driven man, then there will be certainly also a limit of God's mystical activity for the divinization of man in every way, with the obvious sole exception of any identification of man with God's essence, making man like himself and raising him beyond all the heavens, to where the natural grandeur of grace dwells and calls fallen a man through the infinity of goodness. End of quote. For Maximus, the age of has not arrived yet. The age we live now is of the flesh, so he called it. It is different from the age of the spirit, which will come about after this present life. And this idea is eschatological. Maximus certainly means the afterlife, the age after the second coming of Jesus. The present age is framed by the laws of nature. In the future age of Theosis, the natural limits will be overcome. And I quote him again, we will become the very thing that is not in any way the outcome of our natural capacity. Since nature does not possess the capacity to grasp what is beyond nature. For nothing created is by its nature capable of actualizing divinization, since it cannot grasp God. For this is the property of divine grace alone, that is, to grant the gift of divinization proportionately to created beings, brightly illuminating nature by light that transcends nature, actively elevating nature beyond its own proper limits through the excess of divine glory. Now we come to a theologian who lived in the Middle Ages in Byzantium, in Constantinople, and he probably was the most eloquent in describing his personal experiences of divinization. Just like, remember Plotinus, we mentioned Plotinus, how he described his personal experience of becoming like God. So Simeon, the new theologian, was very open, was very explicit in describing his experience of being divinized. He described how thesis affects human beings and experiences. And him is the source of such experience. And I quote him, "My hand is Christ and my foot is Christ." Well, Simeon wrote these verses after taking communion, and this was his experience of, contemplating himself being transformed, transfigured after the divine liturgy, after taking communion, Eucharist. And he continues, "And I, miserable, am a hand of Christ and a foot of Christ. I move my hand, and it is the whole Christ who is my hand. Since we should think that the divine divinity is undivided. I move my hand, and behold, it shines like he himself. Do not say that I am blaspheming, but rather accept this and venerate Christ, who makes you such. Thus, you have recognized my finger to be Christ, and even my pudendum. Did you not tremble did you not feel shame when you said that Christ is like my uncomely member? I suspect that you pronounce blasphemy. So for Simeon, the entire human being, the entire human body can be, excuse me, my leaves can be I'm sorry, it was a wind.
Okay.
It was like a spirit. Sorry. It's okay. It's okay. Yeah. Yeah. So for him, this experience of divinization affected the entire human body, the entire human being, did not leave any part of the human body outside of this experience of the divine. A century after Simeon, a Coptic monk in Egypt, who became later a bishop, whose name was Bulus al-Bushi, Paul of Bush, who lived in the end of the 12th, beginning of the first half of the 13th century, in a similar way connected the incarnation, Eucharist, and Theosis. Bulus did this in Arabic language. Soon after, this language had replaced Coptic in the life and worship of the Christian community in Egypt. The writing of Paul marked a renaissance of the Christian literature in Arabic under the Ayyubid rule in Egypt. I quote the Paul's deliberations on Eucharist, which are similar to those deliberations made by Simeon, the new theologian. Then, after that, God added to us a favor in relation to the state Adam was in before his error. And he gave us his life-giving body, just as he said, I am the life-giving bread, which came down from heaven. Whoever eats of this bread will live forever. Then he told us what the bread is when he said, the bread that I give even a life. His statement in you means in your essential nature. Essence. It is not external to you, nor is it alien to you. He settled that matter when he said, because my body is true food and my blood is true drink. Whoever has eaten my body, drunk blood, as for he said that because his divinity is united with his body, he has been united with the holy bread and has
Yes, it seems to be that Cyril has to come back in again.
a disruption.
Yes, welcome back.
Yeah.
We can see you now.
Okay, can you see me?
Yes, we can see you and we can hear
good.
you. Okay, you can go.
Okay, good. Yeah. So I continue. I continue quoting Bulus al-Bushi. He has been united with the holy bread and has transformed it into his body in truth and not merely in likeness. Then he said the greatest thing when he made the statement, just as the living Father sent me, and I have life on account of the Father, so too whoever eats me lives on account of me. He did not need to say here, whoever eats my body, because he already had established that in the preceding statement. He said first, the living bread, and informed us that that bread was truly his body. Then he said third, whoever eats me. He means here that he is God incarnate, and his divinity is not differentiated from his humanity. Whoever partakes of the Eucharist in a worthy manner and with faith, God resides in him and gives him the life that he gave to the body united to him. The idea of divinization is particularly strong in the Coptic spirituality and theology and continues to be very strong. If you go, say, to Coptic monasteries nowadays in Egypt, in the desert, and you talk to monks there, they continue, speaking about divinization as the kind of immediate experience. It continues to be very important, and we can see this in the writings of the modern Coptic writers and theologians, such as a modern spiritual writer, Matta al-Maskin, Matthew the Poor, who lived very recently and he died only in 2006. He was an important figure in the Coptic theology and the Coptic spirituality, spiritual writer, and he reflected on the centuries-long Coptic tradition of theology of Theosis. Similarly to Paul of Bush, Matthew wrote in Arabic, and I quote him. He wrote, there occurred a change which the Father termed as deification through the mediation of Christ. Human nature has undergone a heavenly recreation from water and from the Spirit. It has achieved with God grace. End of quote. Oh no, sorry, I continue the quote. It's just a different passage from Paul. The deification, theosis, that the fathers had in mind does not mean the change of the human nature into a divine one. Rather, it means qualifying nature for life with God in a communion of love. So it's interesting how he summarizes. Paul summarizes the teaching of the early fathers, who insisted that there is no kind of change, transubstantiation of the human nature into the divine nature, but it means the adoption of some qualities, properties, which are divine by the human nature, and this happens under the influence of love. And he continues, this is accomplished by lifting the serious barrier that severes the life of man from that of God, namely sin. This takes place through the blood and our partaking of the reason, deification, or union in its perfect sense as a life with God can be fulfilled except at the resurrection from the dead. But we have been granted means of grace, commandments, and the divine power by which to conquer sin, the world, and the life of this age. We have that new door open before us. Through this door, we can have here and now a foretaste of the union with God in communion of love and in obedience. Therefore, the union of man with God, or the legitimate aim to seek. This is due to the pre-existing union between divinity and humanity in the incarnation. It is Christ, then, who has set it before us as an aim. I think this is a very good and a comprehensive summary of the Eastern teaching about theosis. To summarize this teaching, we can say that divinization of human beings is possible because of the incarnation and constitutes the telos, the end, the purpose, the rush of the Christian life. To an arc, it includes the purpose of salvation. I want to explain myself maybe a bit clearer here. So if we consider the idea of salvation, which is very important, crucial to Christianity, it is somehow included in the idea of divinization, at least from the Eastern Christian perspective. Salvation is a part of divinization. It's not that the divinization is a part of salvation, it's the salvation which is a part of divinization, because from the Eastern perspective, Eastern Christian perspective at least, the purpose of the human life, even before Adam and Eve fell, was to reach the point of divinization. And after they fell, they had to be restored first to be saved, and then to continue their journey towards deification. That's why in the Eastern Christianity, at least, divinization is a kind of an arc that surrounds salvation. Not unlike the sin, which does not change human nature ontologically, theosis does not alienate it from its original logos either. So if you take sin, the ideas of sin in Eastern Christianity, in difference, for instance, from some Western Christian traditions, especially like I think the Reformed somehow, there is an idea that sin does not change, does not alienate human nature, does not make human nature different. The human nature just misfunctions, but continues to be the same. Deification in the same way does not change the human nature. Salvation, deification adds to human nature new functionality, new properties, which are divine. It changes the modality, the tropos of the human existence, and makes it fit what God intends about humankind. So that is a kind of my summary of the Eastern Christian take on deification. I wanted to demonstrate that deification is really important. It's really crucial, central for the Eastern Christian theology and spirituality. And as I said in the beginning, deification also was important and continues to be important, even though in a more concealed way in other Christian traditions, in the Western Christian traditions. And we are on our way to rediscover the idea of deification, of theosis in all Christian traditions. Also, I believe it's very fruitful to find parallels and similarities between the Eastern Christian concept of deification with Eastern religions, as there are some striking similarities and the same striking differences between the Christian concept of deification and, say, the Greco-Roman concept of apotheosis. So it's a way to walk towards discovering, those parallels between the Christian concept of deification and the deification within religious traditions, including the Chinese ones. That would be my kind of invitation for you, maybe, to explore these parallels.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for your attention. That's what I
Yes.
wanted to share with you.
Thank you, Professor Hoverun. This was an excellent and inspiring talk, and I think all of us learned a lot about the theological concept of theosis, and you explained this concept so well by relating it to various other categories within theology, but also to its background in Hellenism, and also in the end relating it or raising the question about how much it can also be related to Asian religions. Before I go on with responding a little bit, I just like to remind those listening that please feel free to raise any questions in English or in Chinese in the Q&A box, and we will try to respond to them. 请大家如果有什么问题，你们随便写英语也可以，普通话也可以，在这个 Q&A 这个地方里，你们可以就是我们尽量就是回答你们的讨论你们的问题哈。So thank you again, Father Hoverun. And one point that you put very clearly that I found very impressive and very clearly put is that Christian theosis is possible only because of the incarnation. So this fundamental link between incarnation and theosis has remained an important argument throughout your presentation. For instance, when you explain how Maximus described the age of theosis as mirroring the process of incarnation. Now, your presentation offers an amazing tour through the early Christian tradition, showing how various theologians emphasized theosis as a center of what the Christian faith is all about. Now, if we overlook the huge varieties of theologies within all of Christianity, East and West, North and South, we can see that one of the core questions, or maybe one of the systematic frameworks within we can understand the diversity of theologies, is the question about how do the divine and the human come together. This may refer to, of course, to the question of the incarnation, but it may also refer to the question of how we as human beings get involved in this whole divine act of God becoming man. Now, one of the struggles that many Christians, and maybe most importantly Protestant Christians, and among them most particularly Reformed Christians have, Reformed Christians are those, of course, Professor Cyril knows that, but I say it for the listeners, the Reformed tradition is the tradition that goes back to Calvin, and maybe where the most famous theologian was Karl Barth in the 20th century. So for Reformed Christians, there is always the worries about the confusion of the divine and the human. So Reformed Christians are particularly strict in their emphasis on separating the divine and the human. As Karl Barth would say, God is the holy other, the one standing above us, etc. So God is God, man is man, and there is nothing except of in Jesus Christ that brings the two together. Now, against such concern, you state very clearly that it is only based on the incarnation that humans can participate in God and can appropriate divine qualities. Maybe the place where you explain it most pointedly is when you say they can become like God without turning to God. I really like this. Early in your talk, you said that. So also you refer to the idea of perichoresis. You know, perichoresis means the ambulation or the exchange of properties among the three persons of the Trinity, so the three persons of the Trinity mutually dwell in each other, exchange their particularities, and that humans can, based on such mutual appropriation, also appropriate divine qualities. Now, here my some critical questions comes in. Like, as I am myself standing in the Reformed tradition, maybe that's where I have my own sensitivities. I wonder whether you and the tradition that you quote always maintain this strict relatedness to the incarnation. As for instance, when you say that every human being has a godlike part in his or her nature. Actually, also when you refer to the Eastern tradition, because one of the reservations I have regarding the Eastern tradition is that this separation is not always clearly maintained. God is somehow also in us. We are also kind of turning divine. So is this really a part in us that we have? Although you characterize this equality to God, this isotheon, simply as a potentiality, are we not in danger of easily turning it into more than a potentiality, rather as into an innate ability? As for instance, when Hesychus described it as our immortal soul. That's one of the problems I have there. One fundamental concern that the concept of theosis caused is the so-called Feuerbachian danger. Maybe just Feuerbach, that was a post-Hegelian, left-Hegelian philosopher, a Marxist philosopher, sorry, not the Marxist philosopher, but someone preparing the way for Marx. He kind of put
pre-Marxist.
Yes, the essence of Christianity. He said famously, as I reduce theology to anthropology, I raise anthropology to theology. Same as Christianity, by degrading God to humans, elevates humans to God. So several of the statements that you quote play into this kind of Feuerbachian's criticism of Christianity. Here in these quotes, Christianity appears simply as making man perfect in God because God is made man, as for instance in your quote of Gregory of Nazianzus. So, but on the other side, and I really appreciate that, you do mention several theologians that remove the concept of theosis from human achievability. I found this already the case in Irenaeus' category of anakephalaiosis or recapitulatio, which seems to be clearly an eschatological category. So not something that happens within this world, but happens at the end of the times. So this builds the eschatological horizon of God's actions. And even more clearly, in your final reference to Matthew the Poor, I really like this reference, you explain very clearly that the theosis or the deification cannot be fulfilled except at the resurrection from the dead. So in other words, there is a tension going throughout Christian theology. It is a tension between humans' active participation in the path of salvation and humans' passive receptivity in the path of salvation. Again, you could take these two stands as embracing all of theology. Somehow all of theology can be located somewhere within this tension between human participation and human passivity. So traditionally, theology in the tradition of Augustine emphasizes more our passive receptivity in salvation. And Eastern theology, you may note that Augustine was probably the single most important theologian for the Western tradition, but not at all so for the Eastern tradition. So Eastern theology emphasized more our active participation in this process and our gradual progress. Yet again, this is not just a duality between East and West, because also in the West, we have traditions such as the Methodist or the Armenian tradition, or also partly the Roman Catholic tradition, that emphasizes more some level of participation of humans in the path of salvation. So in your examples, you show kind of both. You show, you give quotes, you refer to theologians of the Eastern tradition that kind of talk about some human participation, but then also you talk about people from the theologians who are more aware of the danger of too much emphasizing human contribution and try to counter it. So my fundamental question to you is, how much is theosis something that can be reached in this life? And maybe I connect another question to this, and then I would like then to pass also on to questions by our audience. You know, in the Western tradition, maybe one, besides the Roman Catholic tradition, the Methodist tradition is one that has very much emphasized this kind of participation. It's the Armenian soteriology. Armenian soteriology means that humans have some role of saying yes to God's grace. We cannot, of course, it's all God's grace, but we can say no or we can say yes or something like that. And then, but John Wesley also developed this doctrine of so-called perfection, which means that somehow perfection can be reached. Of course, it's not full soteriological perfection, but kind of perfection in love within this world. Now, my question to you is, how do you stand there? How do you understand it? How much is theosis something that can be reached within this life? Yeah, please, Professor Hovorun.
Yes, thank you so much, Professor Brander, for your response. It's a very rich response, I would say. It's really thoughtful. I really appreciate that you've read very carefully, very deeply those texts that I quoted, indeed. And yes, and your questions are very legitimate. I mean, from the theological perspective, absolutely, and they need to be answered. I would say that they are not just Christian questions pertinent to the Christian theology. I'm now in Hiva, which used to be a center of Islamic learning, as you know, and Hiva was also a place where, quite interestingly, similar discussions took place in the Middle Ages. There was a movement here in this area within the Islamic theology that argued for very strong human agency in relationship to the divine providence. So there was a kind of a school of theology which flourished in this place in Central Asia that insisted that human agency is very important, you know, in relationship of human beings with God, with the supreme being. And not everyone shared these ideas, I should say. There were the mainstream school here actually suppressed the school that supported, they advocated for agency, and the same tension, as it were, existed in the Islamic world. So it's really interesting to explore this tension between human agency and providence from every religious perspective, not just in Christianity, but something that interests us, I believe. And indeed, it's yeah, I believe that it is a kind of point of divergence, if you want, between several Christian traditions, within several Christian traditions. I think on this point, we are a bit different in Eastern Christian than Calvinist tradition. Not so much maybe Catholic, even the influenced by Augustine, but who is the kind of the basement, the foundation for the but owing to the medieval scholastic Catholic tradition, a more kind of approach to appreciate the human agency. I would answer maybe briefly how we perceive the idea of energy, vibration between and an image which was uttered by a modern theologian. He was not really a theologian; he was a monk.
Can you go closer to the microphone?
Yeah,
you are breaking off a bit. Can you try to go closer to the microphone also? Yeah.
Yeah, I will repeat. Yes, thank you. So I want to exemplify where we stand in Eastern Christianity regarding human agency by an example offered by a modern monk. He died maybe 20, 30 years ago. His name was Theosis. He lived on Mount Athos. And I like, this very simple way to explain human agency vis-a-vis divine providence. He said that we human beings, what we can do is just we can draw zeros. Whatever we do, we just draw zeros, many zeros, right? And however many zeros we draw, they remain zeros, some. But then God comes, the divine grace, and God puts one in front of those zeros. Mm-hmm. And then those zeros, obtain weight, essence, meaning. They become real things. And then with the divine grace, the zeros we drew, our effort becomes rewarded by the divine grace. That is the way how I would put, our theology in Eastern Christianity. So without God, all our efforts are zeros. Yeah. With God, they take, and wait. That would be my answer to your last question. And speaking about the first question about the kind of divided line between the divine and human, I think in Eastern Christianity we are very clear about distinguishing between what is created and uncreated. Like the ancient Greeks, they use the category of mortality to differentiate between the transcendent and immanent, between the divine and human. So they use the category immortality. In Christianity, we use the category of createdness. What is created and what is not created, what is uncreated. And I think this dividing line is very clear with us. We human beings are created. We cannot become uncreated. But we can be united with God by his uncreatedness. That's why in Eastern Christianity, we have another important idea of energies, energia, or activities. They can be translated as activities. Properly know that in the Middle we had a theologian such as Gregory Palamas who articulated this theology of uncreated energies, that God has energies, and the energies, activities, is God himself. They are uncreated. And we believe that we as Christians can participate not in the divine essence, which is inaccessible for us, but in the divine energies, which are God himself. They are uncreated, but these energies actually make God standing out, coming out to us and uniting, bringing us in unity with God. The Christians experienced these energies not just like concepts, like ideas, but as light. And they use this image of God, of divine light, as the uncreated energy of God coming to us and enlightening us. Simeon, the new theologian, whom I mentioned, described this experience of the divine light as penetrating the human being and making human beings divinized. Theosis is the result of the divine light energy coming out from God and penetrating us and bringing us closer to God. Of course, we still distinguish between God and human beings in the process of theosis. I personally use the term distinction as different from separation. In Christology, in the Christian East, we differentiate between those two concepts, distinction and separation. We can separate two things. It's a physical process of separation. And in this sense, God is separated from human beings because God is uncreated, human beings are created. But in Jesus Christ, they came together to the extent of not being separated, but being only distinguished. And in the process of theosis, believe that in theosis, in a human being, God becomes united with a human being to the extent of not being separated, but being distinguished. So that is a kind of important nuance that we use. It means that God remains God. Human in beings. There's a huge chasm still between God and human beings. The chasm that cannot be bridged by human effort. Through Jesus Christ, this chasm is bridged. Which is our theory. That would be your questions.
Thank you, Father Cyril. We have now 5 questions here. So if there is anyone more, please write in now, because I will stop. I don't want to go beyond maybe 4:40. Another maximum 20 minutes. We actually plan to finish it by half, but I would like to give justice to those who have asked questions. So so you have to be relatively short, Professor Hoverun. The first question comes from Peter Xie from Taiwan, who has participated in the translation of some works on theosis. So he asks, I do have a question regarding to Gregory of Palamas and Vladimir Lossky's theology of energy. I wonder if I can get your opinion. The theology of energy stresses the difference between divine and human natures, so that two natures will have no chance of mixture or change into another nature. Therefore, when Lossky Palamas interpret 2 Peter 1:4, the partaker of divine nature, they change the meaning of the stance from the meaning of words to human can only participate in divine energy, not divine nature. If so, do you think this stress might endanger the true or the actual unity of the divine and human nature, since unity involves koinonia of each other? So how do you see that?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you for this question. You indicated what Palamas and Lossky and other theologians stressed. Indeed, we believe that we cannot participate in the divine essence. Well, they use the word, the Eastern kind of theologians were careful enough not to use the word nature, physis, in application to God. They use the word essence in application to God as the aspect of the divine which is inaccessible for human experience. This essence remains what they call the divine darkness. Darkness not in the sense of evil, but in the sense of something that cannot be penetrated, cannot be accessed by human experience and human knowledge or human experience. So that is the essence which remains outside our reach. But God is not unreachable for us. That's why we introduce this idea, the Christian theologians use this idea of energy, activity, which is the accessible part of God. So the nature, essentially, the concept of nature, physis, comprises the concept of essence, ousia, and the concepts of energy, energia, somehow. It doesn't mean that nature and, essence and energia are two different things in God. In this case, God would be separated in two different parts. No, the divine nature remains simple, and we insist on simplicity of the divine nature. The divine nature simply can be accessed and remains inaccessed for us. The inaccessed part of the divine nature, so to say, part, I use part, in the quote marks, because it's not part, it's the same divinity, is inaccessible. The accessible side of divinity, the side that Moses experienced on Mount Sinai when he saw the rear of God. So to use the biblical language, that is the accessible part of divinity. And in the Christian theology in the East, we call it the activities, the energies of Christ. That's why we do not say that the nature is inaccessible. We don't apply the word thesis actually to God. We apply in the East the concept of ousia as the inaccessible aspect of divinity and energia as the accessible one.
Thank you. A question that goes into a similar direction is that it is a question by Sierra too. Tau. It is interesting to note that when Calvin interprets 2 Peter 1:4, he followed a similar concern, stressed that human has no way to participate in divine nature, but only quality of divine nature. Since speaker mentions about Reformed theology and Calvin, yeah, I think this might also be answered by what you have just said.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, you can also distinguish between the essence and quality, what the Greeks called theosis, the aspect that is the attribute of the divine nature. Of course, they use different terminology. Also, they use like quality, theosis. They use the simply because different aspects of quality. We don't need to go deeply into those categories, those differentiations, but I think it's a good way to put it, as it was suggested by the student.
Yeah, thank you. Then I have a simple question that you may answer very briefly. What is the role of isotheon in Eastern Christianity today? And is there a corresponding or related concept for isotheon in theology today?
Yes, we can say that isotheon is something which has been called in theology as imago Dei, image of God.
Oh yeah, that's good. Yes.
And that is also answering your question, Tobias, regarding what is the divine sparker, this divine part in the human nature. That is the image of God. It's not God himself. It's the image of God which is divine in the human.
Yeah, that's very.
And that we can call isotheon.
Yeah, so we could also say that this is something that is always there. So that would also be the role of isotheon in Eastern Christianity today.
Exactly.
That's kind of like the basis of everything. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Then
exactly.
Thank you. Then a question on St. Thomas. Is St. Thomas' beatific vision or connature also a sort of theosis? What are their similarities and differences? So he tries to kick it.
Yes, there are some. Yeah, thank you. Yes, it's a very. I think there are some similarities and some differences, Thomas. Some irreconcilable differences, I would say, because Thomas insisted that we can experience the divine essence immediately. Something that in the East we do not exactly share, because we still believe in the Christian East that we do not have access to the divine essence. We cannot contemplate the divine essence even in the future age alone after the resurrection. The essence remains completely inaccessible for created beings, however saint, holy they are. We have only access to God through the divine activity, something that Thomas did not actually envisage himself. Yes, I think there is this kind of difference between Eastern Christianity and the Western
Get closer
Christianity,
to the
Roman
microphone.
tradition in particular, going back to Thomas. Yeah, I think there is still
clearly.
a difference between. Can you?
Not clearly
Can
now.
you hear now?
No, still not well.
Can you hear me?
Not well.
Okay. No? Is it better now?
Yes, now it's better. Yes.
Is it better now? No?
Yes, better, better.
Okay, sorry. So yes, yeah, I believe there is a kind of a point of difference which has not been yet surmounted somehow by theologians, by modern theologians, between East and West regarding the concept of the vision of God, how we envisage the vision of God in the East and in the West. You know, we between the Eastern and Western theologians, we have discussed many differences that existed in the past, like filioque, and we reached an agreement on those differences. But still, we cannot, reach an agreement on the concept of the accessibility of God. It's still kind of a point of divergence, and it goes back to Thomas, goes back to Gregory Palamas, our Eastern theologians. So it's still a debatable issue. We insist in the East that God is inaccessible in his essence, cannot be plated his essence even after the second resurrection, can be still contemplated in this life through the divine uncreated energies.
Okay, please, for all the attendants, don't ask any questions anymore. I close now the questions. We have still a couple of questions going on. I would like to take two questions together, the question by Shirley from the Divinity School and by an anonymous attendee. The question is divinization a kind of status moment, or is it a journey of life? And the other question that is maybe closely related is, does the the sin coming into the world affect the plan of divinization?
Yes. So as I mentioned, divinization is the initial goal for human being, at least from our perspective, Eastern Christian perspective. The first couple was created with a purpose to reach the point of divinization. That's why when the temptation happened in the paradise, and the devil suggested Eve to be like by detouring, the way suggested by God towards divinization. Actually, the devil in the paradise suggested the first couple to have a shortcut towards divinization, which had been promised by God. And because they took this shortcut to divinization, they fell. That's how the fall happened. So explain the fall also from the perspective of divinization in the East. And we explain the salvation also from the perspective of divinization. We say that salvation is just a step towards divinization. Yes, we made this, we misstepped, we fell. Now we were restored by Jesus Christ, through the incarnation. And we need to continue our journey, which had been set up in the beginning, the journey towards divinization. And for us, divinization is not an instantaneous moment. For us, divinization is a way of life. We go towards divinization all our life. And yes, it's like the life journey.
Yes, thank you very much. And then I have a question which was raised in Chinese, and it's quite a tricky question, actually, interesting one. I would like to ask whether the idea of theosis is influenced more by ancient Eastern philosophy, religion, and cultural traditions, and because of this, maintained and emphasized this idea so much. So there is some similarity with Buddhism and Taoism, thus manifesting a remarkable difference between Eastern and Western ways of thinking, or does it rather belong to the origins of early Christianity? So the question is somehow, is it more something that is kind of there because of this kind of philosophical cultural influences, or is it really simply something that is coming from the origins of early Christianity?
Yeah. Thank you for this question. It's wonderful. I believe that the idea of theosis was influenced by other cultures, particularly Greco-Roman culture. But the influence was limited. The influence was mostly relevant to the language, how the theologians expressed the their teaching about theosis. I believe that teaching per se, in its essence, is profoundly Christian. It comes from the revelation, from the Bible. It's biblical. But the way how theologians explained this concept of theosis was borrowed to a great extent from other cultures, particularly from the Greco-Roman culture. At the same time, theologians wanted to make different the Christian perception of theosis from the ancient Greek. That's why, for instance, as I mentioned in the beginning, they used a completely different term. They coined a different term. They never used the Greco-Roman term apotheosis. They used the term theosis for that.
Yeah,
that's why, yes, there are similarities in the language, but the meaning is very Christian, I believe, in this concept of theosis. And of course, there are some parallels between Christianity and Eastern religions. That's true. I would not explain those parallels by borrowings. If you take, for instance, even Islam and Christianity, there are some interesting concepts in Islam about uniting with God through through constant prayer. In Sufism, in Sufi interpretations of Islam, and there is also another similarity between like Jesus prayer and mantra in Buddhism. Some common kind of practices of reaching, unity with God. Yes, there are some parallels. Maybe they are not necessarily like borrowings. Well, people just try to do similar things to get united with God, and they need to be explored. And I believe that yes, Christianity is very self-sufficient theologically, yet it's not a closed system. Yeah. There are many parallels and which need to be explored.
I really like this response. I think that is really, this opens up a huge window also of interreligious, but also intra-religious communication between East and West, but also between Eastern religions and Western or kind of not Western, sorry, Christian religion. So this is a fascinating field, and I'm happy that you are involved there. And obviously, yeah, it's a very makes an important part of your life now being in Uzbekistan. Now, sorry, I have one last question, which goes a little bit into another direction. So please try to respond it very briefly. The question by Zita from CUHK is that you mentioned the notion of free will, and the person realized that it is interesting that scriptures talked more about the will of God, and Jesus was proclaiming sometimes not out of his own will, something happened not out of his own will, but out of the will of God. But it seems to this person who asked to Zita that the Old Testament talked very little about the will of God. So when does the idea of free will or the will of God arose? Is it because of the influence of the Greco-Roman or Stoic philosophical influence? How do the Eastern fathers understand the free will? So it's a huge question. So I don't know whether you want to answer it or whether you can give a very short answer.
It's huge.
Yes,
it's huge. Well, actually, I try to answer. I'll try to answer very briefly.
Yes.
Well, I wrote a dissertation. My PhD thesis was on the concept of free will in the patristic literature. Wow. I should say that indeed it's a huge question indeed for the ancient culture. And if you take Greek tragedy or comedy, the Greek literature, it's all about the prevalence of the divine will over the human will. And I believe only Aristotle started talking about the human agency as independent from the divine, especially in his Nicomachean Ethics. It continued in the Stoic philosophy somehow, but I think flourished really in Christianity. And we owe, as Christians, the idea of human will, human agency, free will to Origen, the great Alexandrian theologian and thinker who lived in the 3rd century, Origen, who actually advocated for the idea of the human agency as a very important component for salvation of human beings, without which salvation is impossible, without human agency. So the posterior fathers somehow continued this Origenian kind of line of thinking. But I think, yes, it is very important. And if we want to to understand the Christian concept of free will, we need to go back to origin. And of course, the idea I mentioned in my lecture, the idea of freedom is connected with the idea of theosis. So there is a parallel between the concept of image of God, the concept of sotheon as a potentiality for deification, and the concept of aftexousion as a will, a human freedom, which cannot be taken from human beings, which is kind of nested in the human nature. And then this potentiality can grow into actuality of the likeness of God when the imago Dei translates or develops into the likeness of God. In terms of theosis, it means divinization. It means that isotheon becomes theosis, the actuality of the deification, and freedom, the potentiality of freedom, aftexousion becomes eleutheria, the freedom in Christ, the fullness of freedom, which is the goal of Christian life. So there is a correspondence between the idea of image of God, divinization, and freedom.
Thank you so much, Father Cyril, Professor Hoveroon. I think your questions, your answers to these many questions showed us, your ability to also engage with the hearers and the audience, and they were very helpful to add to your interesting talk. So I'd like to thank all those who participated in this talk, who raised their questions, for your attention, for your thoughtful participation. It was a pleasure to have you. It was a pleasure to moderate this talk. And so I hope we get in touch soon again physically. Visit us here in Hong Kong, be it on the Tofungshan or here at the Chinese University. And I trust that you will be traveling soon again when borders are more open again in China, so that some of those listening from China or from Taiwan or elsewhere can hear you live. So we wish you all the best, and in the name of
thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're most welcome. I have a few just a few final information for the audience. First of all, please follow our WeChat official account. It's SCT. It's uploaded there to obtain the thesis and watch the Sino-Christian Theology online lecture series. You may also visit our website, on our website, the Logos and Pneuma journal, which is now uploaded to our website for free. So whenever you want to learn more about this kind of this East-West dialogue, the work of Sino-Christian Institute, go to the website and see what you can find there now free for download. Then I would also like to point out to the next lecture, which will take place on the October 22 at the same time, 3 to 4:30 p.m. So that's in a week's time. The topic will be Sins and Boundaries, the Catholic conception of sin in late Ming and early Qing China and its social significance. This will be a lecture given by Xiao Qinghe, professor from Shanghai University, and the interlocutor will be Zhou Weiqi from the Chinese Academy of Social Science. So this is what we have for you today. We wish all of you all the best, a beautiful weekend, and for you, Professor Hoveroon, a beautiful stay in Uzbekistan. I hope you have some good meal there and some good discussions. All the best to you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.